Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Tantra's Mantra where we go behind and beyond the tech news headlines. I'm your host Prakash Sangam, founder and principal at Tantra Analyst. Today, instead of talking about specific news or product announcement, we will discuss a recent event and the takeaways from it. The event is the Analyst Summit that Silicon player Marvell Technology had it a few days ago. There were no specific announcements at the event, but it was more of a company executives giving an update on the state of the company, the opportunities and challenges that are in front of them, company's strategy to address them, and so on to a set of analysts. The event was divided into three parts. The first part was executives and the business heads presenting their views, followed by a little bit of a detailed technical discussion session on different industries and the businesses Marvel plays in, concluding with the open Q&A with Marvel CEO Matt Murphy. I'll discuss the takeaways from the event with my good friend and fellow analyst Leonard Lee of Next Curve. We both attended the summit at Marvel's headquarters in Santa Clara, and I'm delighted to actually welcome Leonard back to the show. We had him a couple of months ago discussing, I think, Vision Pro from Apple. Leonard, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's good to be back on. Looking forward to this chat and talking about Marvell's Industry Analyst Day.
And feel free to give a plug on your company and your work.
Yeah, sure. So I'm the executive analyst at NextCurve, and we're a research firm based here in San Diego. So Prakash and I are neighbors. We bump into each other quite a bit, and you can find our research at www.next-curve.com. And we broadly cover topics across TMT or technology, media, and telecommunications. Great to be back on, as I said, Prakash, and this should be a fun chat.
Indeed. Again, thank you very much for coming over. Let's get started. I think the event was very well organized. It is my third year attending, second year in person.
Mm.
First year I could not because at another event.
Mm.
What I like this event is it's not a large marketing show, but a cozy event only with few analysts, maybe 30, 40 of them, definitely less than 50, which
Mm.
enabled very open and focused discussion rather than just repeating the corporate messaging, right?
Mhm.
So what did you think of the event itself?
Well, it was my first time.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of loosely cover Marvell. As most folks know, they're one of the smaller players in the market, albeit one
Mm-hmm.
that's quite dynamic and has made its name for itself, especially with the advent or renewed interest in, AI, thanks to the generative AI hype.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought it was a very well put together program. I was actually
Mm-hmm.
really surprised at the density of the content as well as the schedule. So they kept us busy.
Indeed.
It was one day, right?
Yeah.
But they managed to cover most of their business. Although I thought, as someone coming in new to the actual industry analyst day, I, I thought it was heavily weighted toward their new AI narrative. And I don't think they had that last year because we had heard a lot about their network play, their open RAN play, especially going into MWC. So, one of the things that I did notice was huge emphasis on AI, or what they call accelerated computing, if you will, for the data center. I thought that was the big impression that they wanted to press upon the analysts, is that they are a player in that in that domain.
Yeah, indeed. And when I attended last time, I mean, they still talked about the same subjects without mentioning
Mhm.
AI by name. It was more about data centers, interconnect,
Yeah.
compute, and so on. I mean, compared to last year, what I found a little bit different and refreshing and good is last year it was basically
Hmm.
different business heads coming in. making the case for their own businesses and so on, discussing the opportunities and so on and how good they are doing.
Sure.
But this year they had a good theme that they put in place in the opening session that we had with Chris Koopmans, who was the COO,
Yeah.
saying that AI is big, which is not nothing new, but the key things that are needed for AI are, from their point of view, compute, which I agree, and transport, which is connectivity as well as the
Mhm.
switching,
Right.
and and they are leaders and have a large market share and making a lot of headways in those markets. So the whole AI narrative is very well set for them.
Yeah.
So, and and I looked at the different sessions, even the in-depth sessions in the later half, were kind of always connecting back to that theme that, okay, two things big in AI are compute and transport and connectivity, and we are leaders there, and everything that they talked about was how we are improving both on both of those fronts, which kind of made sense. And also for somebody to remember, going back after those very dense sessions of full day, you can always relate back and think about what they talked about. Oh, those are the two things. So it was very impactful in my view.
Yeah. I don't know what it was like last year, but maybe you can provide me with some feel for what it was like last year. But this year,
Mhm.
what I the impression that I got was interconnect was like the huge thing, right? Like you mentioned, compute is important.
Mhm.
They definitely have a play there with some of the custom things that they're doing,
Yeah.
and we'll probably touch upon that later on.
Mhm.
But interconnect, I mean, this whole idea of network fabric for AI,
Mhm.
being able to support new topologies, new architectures within the data center as well as outside of the data center. And then when you look at the rack, between within the rack, and that a lot of that really, I think, said a lot about how Marvell is looking at the opportunity, and maybe that might even be more sustainable or important going forward than the compute part, because on the compute end there's a lot of competition, albeit on interconnect there is as well. But
Mhm.
their legacy in photonics, which they touted quite a bit. So Nguyen Nguyen, who is EVP of
Yeah.
optics, he had a lot of stage time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And he talked, I mean, he spent a lot of time talking about the next gen interconnect technologies and the kind of network infrastructures that would become possible for AI. And they really emphasize quite a bit how AI is different from general purpose compute. Like everyone else, they're kind of giving general purpose computing a really hard time. Although I think maybe that's kind of if you want to call it sort of a false equivalency. AI computing itself is a different kind of workload, right? And you have general purpose computing. It's definitely fit for purpose for what we think in terms of traditional software. But the AI computing, yeah, we're probably talking about a different kind of curve, and lots of talk about the accelerated computing infrastructure, right? And we've heard this, from Jensen Huang of NVIDIA for a few years already. How heterogeneous computing is enabling new kind of compute models to support these the emerging AI workloads, and in particular with Gen AI, the need to scale at a very, very massive level, right? That is, I think, what Marvell thinks is going to drive a demand for these new and emerging advanced interconnect technologies, gravitating toward photonics.
Correct. And last year as well, they had
Yeah.
the optical connectivity
Oh,
was a huge part of the presentation as well, and
was it?
they have leadership there,
Mm,
so it makes sense for them to tout it.
yeah.
And also, I mean, the data centers are growing, and interconnect is becoming a challenge, and it's a need, right? Moving from
Right, right.
simple copper to electrical or optical, connectivity. So I think yeah, makes sense. Yeah, and about compute, I kind of believe what they were saying, that custom compute is becoming mainstream. I mean, they were the
Yeah,
probably the earliest ones to start. And if you look at how the hyperscalers are moving, it used to be depending on third party generic compute, but AI workload itself is becoming so specific and so focused. Custom
yeah,
optimized compute for that specific workload, I think, makes sense. And we've seen that hyperscalers are looking at that, right? I mean, Amazon is far ahead compared to others. Microsoft is making noise as well. Google, of course, has been investing in a lot of TPU. So looking at Gen AI, most of it is on GPU right now, but I see a curve where it will move to heterogeneous, which means different kinds of compute. And these hyperscalers focusing on their own,
yeah,
or with collaboration with somebody, a specific compute, designed and optimized for their own workload.
yeah,
And whoever is providing that kind of competence to them, not
yeah.
just taking off the shelf platform and then selling it to them, I think there will be interest, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, in a way, you got to kind of look at it as like everyone trying to create their own walled gardens, right? Trying to
Yeah,
create
yeah.
an optimized stack, and maybe some of the things that we talked about, or at least some of the side conversations I had with the Marvell executives. We talked about model specific optimization, so literally
Mhm.
silicon geared toward a particular model,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So I mean, it's like custom ASICs for a particular model to tune into the way that that particular model behaves, and then designing the silicon to drive efficiency and foster sustainability. Sustainability, I mean, it wasn't a really huge topic, but obviously it's a big concern given how power hungry these applications are,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Whether it's the model training workloads and efforts, or the inference. And so lots of interesting things happening there, but apparently some bets to move away from GPU, let's say,
yeah.
centric solutions, right? So might I don't know if it spells bad, bad news for NVIDIA. Regardless, whatever silicon you're using, whatever stack you're using, interconnect is still important. And it seems like, Marvell at least has that to fall back on as the AI, the Gen AI tide continues to lift everybody. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, indeed, indeed. And I also think, I mean, it is not a immediate cutover, but if you look long term, I think definitely custom silicon has a major role to play in inference. Training, we'll have to see whether they can replace GPUs, whether GPUs, because they're all concentrated in one location and a few locations. They might provide better solution, at least in the short term, maybe in the long term as well. But on the inference side, I definitely see role for custom silicons. I was at this MediaTek analyst event a few weeks ago, and guess what? Although they are, in terms of shipping, they are number one
Yeah.
off the shelf SoC silicon providers, but they were also talking quite a lot about custom silicon, especially for AI workloads, because I think it's a very large market for all the silicon providers, right?
Yeah. And the other thing that I thought was pretty interesting is
Hmm.
all of this like culminates into a story that I think they've been trying to work on for quite some time, which is this pivot toward a diversification of their business away from consumer toward data infrastructure. And I think a lot of folks think that that was a good bet that
Yeah,
Matt Murphy made. back in the day.
Yeah,
But now, I think that whole data infrastructure discourse is now turning into, this new buzzword that they're coining, which is accelerated infrastructure.
correct.
Right. And so it'll be interesting to see how they continue to play that out as the generative AI wave continues to, ebb and flow.
Yeah.
But definitely that seemed to be one of those points that they really wanted to make, is that they're a key enabler of this idea of accelerated infrastructure.
Correct. They did the pivot, I think, 3 years ago, which I think, timing wise seems to be working out for them, and they're kind of,
Hmm.
we've been working on this from last 3 years, pivoting to the data infrastructure, and then when they are
Yeah.
kind of set on it, and
Yeah.
this an upsurge of AI comes in, so they're well placed if they can play well and exploit that
Yeah.
market. So bodes well. I mean, I think they're still.
Yeah.
Not making profit. I think the target is to
Yeah.
have profit by 2026 in 3 years. So if the AI traction and might even call hype continues for that long, so that bodes well for their
Yeah.
expected profit timeline.
Yeah, and speaking of that, I mean, even if it's such a volatile situation right now, right?
Yeah,
There's all kinds of interesting signals in the market
yeah.
in terms of the, let's call it, the integrity of the Gen AI opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that impressed me, and I don't know if you got this impression in previous analyst days,
Mm-hmm.
is their investments in R&D. They are looking at, they're basically touting and investing heavily and continuing to invest in things like silicon photonics, next generation, optical and switches, as well as investments, like, for instance, 5 nanometer technology for their silicon designs. Now looking at now 3 nanometer going forward. They have kind of this technology portfolio strategy where they can go to market in some of these expansion markets that they're pursuing at the moment, like automotive and the Open RAN network and such, where I think they can kind of pivot really quickly. And so as the different markets shift, and there's let's say an adjustment that they can make, there's some leverage that they have there, which I'd like to see whether or not they can capitalize on if things get a little bit volatile, especially going into 2024.
Yeah.
So but those investments look like they were done pretty diligently or wisely. I guess we'll see how wise, uh, you know, if there is this need for them to pivot and make adjustments as the generative AI opportunity, evolves, because it will. It's not going to be the same. It'll be different from what we see today,
Mhm.
and as other markets start to run their cyclical course, whether it's on the telco side or automotive.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I mean, that's another major bet they did. Basically
Yeah.
investing heavily and getting access to the 5 nanometer when it was pretty new, and using that for custom. I think that was a big bet. I think so far it seemed to have paid off for them, and I think they mentioned they are also focusing on
Mhm.
being the lead in 3 nanometer and 2 nanometer nodes as well. So they continue to invest, getting the latest node into their portfolio. So that's interesting. And you mentioned about automotive, which they talk quite a lot as well during the event. Going in, I mean, for automotive, the big market was SoCs, right? I mean, there are multiple players there. That's an interesting field. But Marvel is looking at it from a different angle, which is Ethernet.
Yeah.
I knew Ethernet is getting a lot of traction and becoming a kind of a standard for interconnects in vehicles,
Yeah.
but I did not know it's that big a market, and it's picking up. And current leader is Broadcom, and I've heard from people in the industry that they are not too much focused on in that market. So you know, which makes
Yeah.
Marvel much easier to pick up market share. What was your view of it? They talk quite a lot about Ethernet, how it's becoming the fabric of not only next generation, the current generation
Yeah.
automotive as well, as you're moving into zonal architecture, right?
Yeah, and speaking of zonal, I think the infusion or the architecture of the car itself, as it moves from like semi-zonal,
Mm-hmm.
like the domain from domain to semi-zonal to zonal,
Correct.
the content's going to change, the capabilities and requirements are going to change, and so. One of the things that Marvell clearly recognizes that there's going to be this evolution that's going to happen over time
Mm-hmm.
and probably a decade's time.
Yeah.
And it'll take time for the more advanced, the more mature, let's say, full zonal architectures to permeate beyond, let's say, certain premium classes or segments of the automotive market over the next 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And, they did mention, yeah, this is kind of a longer term bet because the auto industry is so slow. When you look at SDV or software defined vehicle, it's a
Mm-hmm.
huge re-architecting of the vehicle,
Yeah.
right? And even though there's a lot of companies that are looking at, automakers that are looking at this transformation, it's not a trivial one.
Indeed.
And, the standards for SDV, whether it's at the software or the hardware level, still a lot of things that have to get worked out. But there's been progress because, even 2 years ago, 3 years ago, Ethernet was kind of a thing that people were going, oh, okay, maybe not quite yet, right? But
Yeah.
there seems to be some traction, and I guess the real question here is how quickly will the automotive players or the automakers, accelerate this, uh, re-architecting of the vehicle, But I think their sweet spot and the big opportunity is really going to be when there's that transition to zonal, right?
Indeed. Indeed.
And
Yeah.
that's where the automakers are going to find the most benefit in terms of cost reduction, right? Because there was mentioned something like if you stretched out the wires of a domain, a domain architecture vehicle, it would be like several miles or something like that, right? And then there's a ton of manual labor, human labor that goes into wiring a vehicle of that type. And the zonal architectures reduce that wiring tremendously. But then also from a compute standpoint, you're also reducing the number of ECUs and other components in the car. And you're looking at more of a, let's say, a consolidated compute architecture, more centralized in certain ways, right?
Yeah.
Like a semi-distributed model versus the heavily distributed that we see in most vehicles today.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, the whole Ethernet penetration in cars will go hand in hand with semi-zonal and zonal architecture. So it'll take a long time for the whole industry to move over, but there are definitely good signs that architecture is moving towards that. And initially it was thought, oh, when you have got EVs, the whole architecture is changing and this will be part and parcel of that. But even otherwise, I think many OEMs, even in their IC engine cars, are moving towards it, mainly because of IVI and other reasons, not just because of EV, right? That's interesting to know. And I think
Yeah, yeah.
they mentioned that most of their customers for Ethernet right now are IC engine designs and so on, which is interesting, right? So,
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. And that's a great.
so another thing, then I had a side chat with a couple of the executives. So in terms of Ethernet is an interesting story and seem to be good and working out for them. Also, they have tons of compute IP which could make SoC for automotive as well, right? They have a huge custom compute business as such. So if you look at
Mm.
IVI and self driving and other compute needs in modern cars, they could put together something similar. I think it's interesting to hear that. I mean, they do believe they have good IP in terms of hardware, in terms of silicon, but they say much bigger play there is having good and right software to make use of that hardware, software that is optimized for auto workload, which they say is a huge investment, and that's what is kind of stopping them, or rather, making them think twice before jumping into that, which is an interesting comment, saying that software going into these cars is a major deal, right? So, says a lot about software defined radio that you're mentioning.
Yeah, yeah. We always have to talk about security, right? That was like one of the things that I was really interested in figuring out. Well, especially with Gen AI,
Yeah.
what are some of the security and privacy things that
Hmm.
you're looking at? But for the most part, I thought
Hmm.
um, Marvell didn't really touch on that much outside of a security session that they held, which was very sparsely
Hmm.
populated. So, sadly,
Yeah,
interest in security is not very high,
that's
although
it.
they did want to make a point that, they have this offering called liquid security. And they geared it toward 5G, but it's really provides a HSM,
Uh-huh.
solution for, root of trust, or, providing trust for devices. So, whether it's eSIM or what have you, you can certify and validate and authenticate, things at the edge, right? And so that was kind of cool.
I see.
Didn't get a lot of love.
Yeah, I did not go for that session because I mean you had to pick and choose. So
Yeah,
I did
yeah.
not go. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I initially thought it was like some sort of new software protocol or whatever, but it ends up being a card, a PCIe card that you can install in a server that can provide
I
those
see.
security
Yeah.
services and trust features. So that was kind of cool, and I'm sure they'll be glad that I mentioned it. But I'm mentioning it because I think it's so important. You know what I'm saying? It's like, it's like two people in there other than me.
Interesting. I mean, yeah. I mean, if that was a standalone session, I would have gone. But yeah, there are many other things I directly cover, so I did not go. But
Yeah.
glad that you mentioned. Anything else you want to cover?
No, I mean, I had a couple of, like, I'm not I don't follow optical all that much. I do, kind of generally because of, the industry you and I both um,
Hmm.
cover mutually, which is the telco industry, and transport's
Hmm.
absolutely important. But yeah, I mean, I think these guys are very focused on data center, but I think
Uh-huh.
they have a lot of potential, outside of the data center as well. One of the things that I thought was really interesting are some of the, occasional mentions of inter
Yeah.
data center connect, right? Because they're, I think, mostly known for like short haul, within the data center type interconnect, or within, inner rack type
Hmm.
interconnect. But it seems like there may be some additional opportunities, or at least pivot, paths for them if things change. Their executives didn't seem to see
Hmm.
it, which I thought was interesting. But maybe, speaking of, what I'm interested in seeing next year is, number one, how all this Gen AI stuff,
Yeah.
pans out, right? But then also, edge computing is such a huge topic, whether it's hybrid, due to, hybrid cloud, or edge or hybrid AI.
Yeah.
What is the demand and need for interconnect going to look like, as those those trends and start to unfold and mature.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, I had mentioned it to them last year as well that they don't seem to think edge as a target market for them, which could be right. There's so much happening on the edge.
No.
They mostly focused on the data center itself, right? So
Yeah,
that's an interesting
exactly.
observation. Yeah,
Yeah, even though they do
yeah,
play at the
yeah,
edge because they have an accelerator card for baseband.
exactly. Yeah,
I mean, I
exactly.
don't
Yeah,
know how much
yeah,
more edge you can get than that other than on device, but yeah,
yeah.
makes you wonder if the left hand is talking to the right hand. So, but
And then, all right. Yeah, that was an interesting
yeah,
discussion, Leonard. Thank you very much for coming over
yeah,
and coming back to the show and
absolutely,
sharing your views. And
absolutely,
it was an interesting discussion. We'll see how things unfold for them as Gen AI, evolves and see whether it
yeah,
continues the momentum and the traction goes even higher gear or lower gear.
mm,
We'll see
mm, yeah.
how things turn out. And again, thank you very much. And as Leonard mentioned, you can find all of Leonard's work on his website www.next-curve.com. He has tons of content there, briefs, articles, podcasts, and many more. Again, thank you, Leonard.
Thanks for having me. It's always fun.
So, folks, that's all we have for now. Hope you found this discussion informative and useful. If so, please hit like and subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you are listening this on. Don't forget to check out our previous episodes of the podcast and articles related to the subject and so on our website www.tantraanalyst.com. I'll be back very soon with another episode putting light on another interesting tech subject. Bye bye for now.